Sergeant Elias Kane crouched in the shadow of a shattered barn wall, the acrid bite of cordite lingering in the air like a stubborn ghost. His platoon had battled through Normandy's hedgerows that morning, the bocage transforming every push into a deadly roll of the dice. Now, as dusk seeped into the fields, they clung to this frayed scrap of earth, a mile shy of St. Lo. Elias swiped sweat from his brow, his fingers emerging smeared with filth. At 32, he was Echo Company's elder, his face carved with creases from endless winters in the muck. Brave beyond reason, he'd claimed his sergeant's stripes by hauling a comrade from machine gun hell in Italy. Yet caution clawed at him here, especially where front lines melted into civilian shadows. Private Tommy Ruiz, the lean Brooklyn kid with a tongue as keen as his switchblade, squatted nearby, toying with a pilfered Luger. "Sarge, you reckon Fritz is nursing his hurts or gearing up to hurl him right back?" Tommy's whisper carried that New York bite, slicing tension like butter. Elias met his gaze, blue eyes unyielding. "They're stung bad, but stay sharp. Orders are to hook up with that medical convoy by first light." He tipped his head toward the squad's other two. Corporal Lena Voss, the company's lone woman, a Chicago nurse whose unflinching hands had snatched countless lives from the jaws of death, and Private Harlan Beck, the gangly Iowa farm boy, so wary he might freeze solid, hugging his M1 Garand like a lifeline. Lena fiddled with her medic bag's strap, dark hair tucked tight under her helmet. Tough as nails, she stitched gashes without a blink, but her vigilance gleamed in how she swept the tree line, forever bracing for the next blow. "Convoy's overdue," she said softly, calm, laced with unease. Radio mentioned a botched supply drop. "If it's penicillin they're carrying, delays could kill us, with half the platoon festering from infections." Harlan fidgeted, his freckled cheeks ashen in the dying glow. "Infections, like that rash I picked up in the orchard." Doc brushed it off, but he faltered, throat working. Harlan's courage ran deep and silent, forged in barnyard grit, but war's enigmas terrified him more than lead. The threat slithered in like a murmur, a far-off growl, not storm clouds, but motors. Elias balled a fist, quelling the talk. Headlights stabbed the mist drifting from the fields. No Yankee jeeps, but a trio of German Kübelwagens snaking down the rutted farm track. No retreat. Scouts had whispered of SS remnants prowling for meds, their hospital pulverized by shells, leaving them rabid for relief. If they snagged the Allied convoy first, it spelled disaster. Not mere lost ground, but GIs rotting from gangrene and beyond. Elias's thoughts churned. Those penicillin crates were salvation, a stateside miracle outshining Hitler's wildest schemes. Surrendering them tallied in blood, not maps. "Contact," he breathed, snatching his Thompson. The squad melted lower, pulses thundering as one. Tommy flashed a savage grin, racking around. "Hide and seek it is, Sarge." Lena's gaze sharpened. "We can't let 'em pass, but they're too many." "Flank!" Harlan's knuckles whitened on his rifle. "Or hold for backup. This is suicide straight up." Elias balanced the call, command's burden heavy as sodden wool. The scheme snapped into focus. Hit the lead rig, cripple it, sow chaos in the rest. Clean, direct. But as the convoy growled nearer, tires grinding gravel, he knew war twisted simplicity into knots every time. Tension coiled the air, ripe with the thrill of peril spiked with gore. The mud gripped Private Ellis's boots like a vice, dragging at every slog through the blasted orchard. Dawn cracked open gray and grudging over Normandy's hedgerows, saturating the breeze with wet soil and faint cordite. Ellis dragged his sleeve across his forehead, last night's drizzle blending with new sweat into a gritty paste. Beside him, Sergeant Hale puffed a cigarette, his features grooved by bone-deep weariness. "Eyes open, kid," Hale grumbled, probing the gnarled apple trees for threats. "Krauts infest these spots, like ticks in the weeds." Trailing them, Corporal Ruiz hauled the medical kit, breaths steady despite the load. Ruiz stayed mum usually, mending havoc wordlessly, hands rock-solid amid incoming shells. The trio had hunkered in a foxhole last night, helpless as a patrol shredded under German guns. Now, with lines inching ahead, they foraged for casualties. Friend and foe, though brass often turned a blind eye to the latter. A faint groan sliced the mist, halting them cold. Ellis locked up, rifle rising halfway, until he made out the form slumped against a jagged trunk. One of theirs, a 101st kid named Kowalski, uniform sodden black from a belly gash. "Here," Ellis hissed, kneeling fast. Kowalski's lids twitched, gaze blurry, flesh waxen and slick beneath the dirt. "Fire! Inside!" he croaked, pawing his gut. Ruiz knelt in a flash, flipping open the kit with expert speed. "Gangrene's racing," he stated flat, fingering the wound's frayed lips. The rim bloated, dark veins forking out like fractured glass. Hail sparked another smoke, lingering at the group's edge. "We packing that new juice, the miracle shot." "Penicillin," Ruiz verified, fishing out a slim vial and syringe. Fresh from the drop 2 days gone, rough-edged, stateside-born, good for a dozen souls if fate smiled. Command had hedged at first, dubbing it trial run, but medics hailed it as the slayer of bugs that flipped wounds fatal. Ruiz wiped Kowalski's arm, needle flashing in the pallid dawn. "This'll battle the rot, but evac him quick, once the line holds." Kowalski jerked at the jab, fingers digging into Ellis's sleeve. "Krauts called it yank bullshit," he murmured, voice thinning. "Propaganda, just to spook us." Ellis swapped looks with Hale. Fritz had blared that over, seized sets, scoffing at Allied cures as morale busters for the Wehrmacht. But in this slime, facts ignored the static. They rigged a stretcher from packs, canvas creaking under Kowalski's bulk. The orchard dipped to a sunken lane, platoon rallying there. But motion stirred a rifle's snap from the tree line. Near, vicious. Hale hit dirt, swearing. "Ambush! Down!" Slugs splintered bark, ricocheting off walls like furious wasps. Ellis yanked the stretcher behind a toppled log, chest heaving, as Ruiz shielded Kowalski with his frame. Hale snapped shots blind, Garan roaring into the din. Through the smoke, Ellis spotted them. 3 Germans in tattered felled grow, rising from a hidden ditch. One hurled a potato masher, lobbing slow toward them. "Shift!" Hale roared, thrusting Ellis clear. The boom spewed earth and shards, near enough to rattle their lids. Ruiz grunted, crimson flowering on his shoulder from a splinter. Kowalski wailed once, then slackened. Ellis lunged over, probing pulse. Weak, clinging. Penicillin coursed his veins, but seconds hemorrhaged. The Germans pressed wary, barking harsh commands. Hale nailed one with a fluke crack, the figure folding like emptied grain. But the pair swung wide, trapping them. Ruiz ripped cloth from his shirt for a tourniquet, grimace twisting deep. "Can't stick. Fall back." Ellis agreed, brain whirling. The lane offered escape, but bared Kowalski. He clawed the kit, hunting, smoke, wraps. Fingers snagged the spare vials, breakable gold. Lose the man now, and the wonder went to waste. "Cover!" he barked at Hale, looping the stretcher strap. Hale fired steady without quibble, as Ellis hauled ahead. Focus tunneled to Mudd's tug, bullets hiss by his cheek. A shot snagged his cuff, shredding but sparing skin. Ruiz hobbled after, popping his carbine left-handed. They hit mid-slope when a German snarled, near, authoritative. "Halt! Hände hoch!" Ellis dove, tumbling Kowalski into a dip. The last 2 crested barrels locked. One wiry, gaze skittish as a trapped rat, the other stocky, jaw wrapped from his brushes with fate. They mirrored the Allies' raggedness. Stubble on youthful jaws, gear mended and dull. No propaganda feast here. Hale's rifle dry clicked. Quiet stretched, pierced by Ruiz's wheezes. The wiry one waved his Mauser. "Medic?" Broken English nodding at the kit. Eyes darted to Kowalski, then returned. "We take, prisoner." "No chance," Ellis snarled, palm creeping to his .45, but Ruiz signaled no, shoulder mangled, rot lurking. Outmanned, outfired. The stocky one dropped by Kowalski, eyeing the tear. He muttered low, shock rippling his face. Infection. Schlecht. He scanned Ruiz's wrap, the tossed syringe. "Amerikanische Medizin? Das Penicillin?" Ruiz locked stares. Unfall. The mud sucked at Private Tate's boots like a greedy beast, yanking with every stride as he trailed Lieutenant Harlan through the hedgerow's wreckage. Dawn split the Normandy Bocage in grim, unyielding gray, thickening the air with sodden dirt and far-off cordite. Tate mopped sweat from his brow, helmet canted to expose his neck to the raw gust. Harlan pressed on with even stride, rifle low slung, gaze raking the snarled brush for tells. 2 days past the ambush, and Ellis simmered with fever in their dugout aid post. "Quiet feet, Tate," Harlan breathed, back turned. His tone grated from endless vigils without rest. Tate dipped his chin unseen, shifting the medical satchel's bite on his shoulder. Tucked amid gauze and syrettes lay the vials, rare, unproven, ocean-spanned from U.S. labs. Penicillin. Harlan deemed it their secret edge, deadlier to the unseen killers decimating their men than any slug. They topped a gentle swell, and it loomed. The Kraut outpost, sandbags hunkered in a ditch, shadowed by a gutted farmhouse. Smoke drifted idle from a fire, 2 sentries stalking the edge. Feldgrau fading into haze. Harlan knelt sharp, waving Tate prone. Dug deep but careless, Ellis fades fast without breakthrough. Tate squinted through thorns, gut twisting despite his usual spark. "Careless don't change 3 eye counts, sir, likely more tucked in. 1 slip, and we're begging for the fix." Truth stung. The scheme was skeletal. Skirt left, grenade to flush, storm the suspected stash of radio and drugs. But Ellis's blaze back at base turned hesitation to defeat. Harlan's jaw clenched, fingers dancing on his Thompson's grip. Brave past sense, he'd yanked them from tighter jams, but Tate caught the shadow of hesitation in his eyes. D-Day's ghost. Adapt or perish, Tate. That's the drill. He checked time, then the ditch. Mark coming. The creep was belly drag agony, pulses drumming soil. Tate's inhales shallowed, foliage crackles booming in his skull. Harlan ghosted lead until tobacco's bite reached them. Then the grenade, pulled, flung true. It fell shy, but the roar shredded silence, gutting a bag, flinging a sentry flat. German yells exploded. The other guard sprayed wild, rounds lashing hedges like mad bees. Harlan surged, Thompson stuttering precise. Tate bolted after, legs churning, satchel thumping. His M1 cracked, nicking the farmhouse door as it burst. A shape spilled out, youthful Wehrmacht scrap, hand to ribs. They stormed the nest in a frenzy. Harlan booted a rifle aside, heel on the downed German. Tate cleared inside, pulse hammering, finding crates of chow and a murmuring radio. No drugs, no trove, just fight's fading clamor. "Blast!" Harlan snarled, wrapping the captive's gash with swift knots. The lad, Feldwebel Klaus, he choked under quiz, gaped wide, blood-flecking lips. "Your friend, sick, like mine." English fractured by agony, but the plea landed solid. Tate eased his aim, reading the raw plea in the boy's stare. Posters branded Yanks monsters, yet this whelp had watched his mates wither sans sulfa. Harlan froze, then delved the satchel. "Tate, vials. We won't leave bare, but they might crave this more." He pulled a syringe, amber glow in the murk. Klaus's stare ballooned, not terror, but wonder, as Harlan spelled the penicillin's vow against fevers felling both camps. The radio spat orders from high. Clocks ticked. Tate eyed the rise, where aid might spill any breath. "Sir, we roll. Mercy waits." Harlan stood fast, sliding the jab home clean. "Not mercy. Evidence. Let him haul it home. Expose their bunk to brass." The German dipped weak thanks as they hauled him to shelter. Satchel slimmer, load denser. They slipped into fog-veiled meadows as artillery grumbled afar. Ellis lingered, fate teetering on salvage or sacrifice. Tate pondered if the bet won or lured fresh hell. War scorned wonders, it just counted tolls. The mud latched onto Private Ellis's boots like a parasite, hauling at each plod through the ravaged orchard. Dawn scarcely stirred, smearing the mangled apple trees in queasy gray that turned craters to festering sores. His squad had shoved ahead at crack of light, air dense with moist loam and cordite, but progress dragged like syrup. Sergeant Hale's scouted point, rifle dipped, hunting helmet gleams in the bocage. Corporal Ruiz bore the medical kit rear, straps gouging, vials burden a nagging spur not to fail. "Stay close," Hale rasped, throat raw from dawn to dusk smokes. Cautious soul, he tallied odds and perils, scars from North Africa's dust etched deep. Ellis nodded, ribs thumping wild. 2 days back, the scourge struck, a dysentery wave ravaging the outfit from a cratered stream's foul water. Troops fell raving, drained dry, guts rebelling in the pits. Penicillin alone countered, air-dropped but scattered wild across the waste, half sunk in the mire. With Fritz nipping flanks, reclaiming the hall meant braving open kill zones under fire's shadow. Ruiz daubed sweat, humor muted by fatigue. "This better deliver," he said at last, resetting the pack. "Last dose yanked that Texas boy from the edge, but we're scraping bottom." Ellis eyed him, recalling the lad's fevered mutterings in the tent, antibiotic yanking him clear. Ruiz joked to pierce strain, bold in scraps, but doubt flickered today. 2 already lost to the flux, graves hasty under elms, dog tags heavy in Hale's pouch like accusations. Hale's low whistle froze them. He hunkered by a felled trunk, jabbing urgent. Mist-shrouded forms stirred. 3 Germans, garb merging with vapor, pawing what seemed their crate. Ellis's gut nodded. The foes, cheeks sunken and starved, bickered soft, one jabbing the latch with bayonet. Home front art screamed zealots, but here they rang human, drained and frantic, rifles loose in weary grips. Hale's face hardened. "Silent take. Ellis left swing. Ruiz, watch my 6. No vote." Hale melted into brush like a vet of Kasserine. Ellis arced broad, M1 clenched bone tight, blood roaring. Scheme plain, drop sentries claim crate. But a branch cracked under Ellis, piercing, damning. A German whirled, alarm blooming, clawing his peace. Guns barked before Ellis moved. Hale led, Thompson chattering to floor the closest in a heap. Ruiz's carbine stitched the next through torso. The last fled to thorns, Hale's shot grazing shoulder. Turmoil bloomed, German cries rang distant, an MG-42 stuttering across the flat. Their dawn plot, sketched tight pre-light, imploded grand. Crate gaped, vials winking like contraband gems, but racket woke the swarm. "Snag and bolt!" Hale bellowed, heaving the box as slugs whined, gouging mud. Ellis blasted wild, kick shuddering him, while Ruiz towed the clipped German to lee. "He's ours," Ruiz huffed, blood slicking his cuff. The captive wheezed, arm gripped, features shock-masked in hurt. No zealot fire, just stark dread propaganda couldn't forge. They bounded back, branches raking like bony claws. Hale panted harsh, crate thumping. A bullet skimmed Ellis's pot, dumping him into a puddle hole. He surfaced gasping, emptying his clip. Pursuit lagged, Krauts as thinned, lines frayed from the barrage. Sun-scorched mist away by line's embrace, exposing damage. Ruiz bound the prisoner's tear with trembles, name. Feldwebel Klaus, gritted through pain, a grudging gift. Dysentery stole another while gone, an Iowa lad whose heat defied without the brew. Hale dumped the haul, tallying vials stern. Dozen doses, stretched thin. But Price echoed. The runner fetched aid, and Klaus's gaze bore haunted insight. pierced by his army's empty vows. Ellis sagged on sandbags, viewing Ruiz jab the first to a groaning trooper. Penicillin melted clear in salt water, plain yet laden with life. Klaus perched close, wrapped mute, eyeing the spike like sorcery. No grand unity talk, just the deed, the sting, the easing sigh. Yet afar, guns built thunder, whispering adaptation's brevity, stakes in lives bartered as shells. The sun dipped low over the splintered tree line, stretching shadows across the muddy clearing where field hospital tents drooped beneath another drenched dawn. Sergeant Elias Kane scrubbed grime from his hands on his trousers, stiff with crusted blood and soil. Hours in, he'd triaged the newest wave from the Aachen Drive. GIs pocked with shards, stray civilians in the melee, and the fresh knot of German captives shoved in under watch last eve. Elias eyed Corporal Lena Voss. The nurse pulled from support, her red cross band worn but gaze keen. Methodical, eerily poised, she knotted a stitch on a young private's thigh, cooing fractured German to steady him. "It's not magic," she murmured to Elias sidelong, "not Lou King up. But they'll think it is." The prisoners were the real test. 5 of them, all from the 116th Panzer Division, their uniforms torn and faces gaunt from weeks on the retreat. The propaganda machine back in Berlin had drilled into them that the Allies were butchers, spreading disease like the plague, to soften the fatherland's resolve. Elias had heard the stories from interrogations, Hitler's broadcasts promising wonder drugs of their own, sulfa powders that would turn the tide. But sulfa was failing against the infections ripping through their ranks. And now here was penicillin, smuggled in from the States like contraband hope. One prisoner, a lieutenant named Heinrich Bauer, sat propped against a crate, his left arm bandaged, but his wound festering beneath. He was the talker among them, the one who'd spat defiance when they were captured, quoting Goebbels about the Untermenschen's tricks. Now, fever had softened his edges. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he watched Lena approach with a syringe. "You're wasting it on me," Bauer muttered in accented English, his voice a rasp. "My comrades will fight on. Your poison won't change that." Lena didn't flinch. She knelt beside him, rolling up his sleeve with efficient hands. "It's not poison, it's from mold. Something your scientists dreamed of but couldn't make in time." She nodded to Elias, who held the lieutenant's shoulder firm, feeling the man's tremor. The injection went in smooth, the needle piercing skin with a faint prick that Bauer barely registered over his labored breathing. He pulled away slightly, eyes narrowing. "Lies. We have better. The Führer—" "Save it," Elias cut in, his tone flat but not unkind. He'd seen enough dying men cling to illusions. No point in arguing theology. Across the tent, Private Tommy Ruiz, the wiry medic from Brooklyn who'd become Elias's shadow, was tending to another prisoner, a kid no older than 20, whose gangrenous foot had turned the air sour. Tommy's hands moved quick, cleaning the wound before applying the precious powder form of the drug they'd ground up for poultices. The kid, Fritz, they'd learned his name was, winced but didn't pull back. Unlike Bauer, he hadn't spoken much, just stared at the canvas walls as if waiting for the end. Tommy chatted to fill the silence, his Spanish lilt mixing with the German phrases he'd picked up from Lena. "Hey, Fritz, this stuff, it's like hitting the jackpot. Saved my buddy's arm last week. Guy was green as your uniform." Fritz's eyes flickered, a spark of something, curiosity maybe, breaking through the haze. But Bauer wasn't done. From his spot, he called out, "Don't listen to them, Fritz. It's a trick to make us weak, to betray the Reich." Tension rippled through the tent like a chill wind. The guards at the flap shifted, rifles at the ready, but Elias waved them off. This wasn't about force. It was about the slow unraveling of certainty. He crouched by Bauer, meeting the man's gaze. "You think we're the monsters? Look around. Your boys are rotting from the inside out because Berlin's too busy printing posters to ship medicine." Bauer laughed, a dry cough that turned into a wince. "And you? What do you fight for, American? Your capitalist lies. Elias paused, the weight of the question settling like the mud under his boots. He'd enlisted after Pearl, driven by a mix of duty and the fire in his father's old war stories, but out here, it boiled down to keeping his men breathing. For the guys next to me, he said simply. And right now, that's you. Outside, the rumble of distant artillery echoed, a reminder that the line was fluid, the push toward the Siegfried line grinding on. Elias stepped out for air, the damp chill biting through his jacket. Tommy followed, lighting a cigarette and offering one. Think the lieutenant's buying it? Not yet. Elias exhaled smoke into the gray sky. But that kid Fritz, give it a day. The fever breaks, and suddenly propaganda tastes like ash. Back inside, as the afternoon wore on, the first signs emerged. Fritz's color improved, the angry red around his wound fading to a dull pink under the penicillin's assault on the infection. He sat up a little, accepting water from Lena without protest. Bauer watched from his crate, silent now, his own arm throbbing less fiercely as the drug coursed through him. By evening, when the rain started again in earnest, pattering on the tent roof like impatient fingers, Bauer called Elias over. The defiance had cracked, replaced by a wary exhaustion. How many doses? He asked, voice low. Enough for now, Elias replied, handing him a canteen. But the war's not over. You live through this. Maybe you tell your own what it's really like. Bauer took a sip, his eyes drifting to Fritz, who was dozing peacefully for the first time in days. No grand speeches, no conversions. Just the quiet evidence of a body mending, a truth sharper than any broadcast. The artillery thundered closer, pulling them all back to the edge, but in that moment, the tent held a fragile peace, bought with a vial of golden liquid that no regime could counterfeit. The mud clung to Elias's boots like a second skin, sucking at each step as he trudged through the shattered remnants of the village. Dawn had barely cracked the sky, painting the rubble in grays and sickly yellows, but the air already hummed with the distant rumble of artillery. He adjusted the strap of his medical kit, the weight of the last few vials of penicillin inside it, a fragile anchor against the chaos. Beside him, Sergeant Harlan kept pace, his rifle slung low, eyes scanning the hedgerows for any sign of the patrol they'd lost contact with hours ago. Think they're still breathing out there? Harlan muttered, his voice rough from a night of chain smoking. He was the cautious one, always calculating odds, but today his caution bordered on paranoia, glancing back every few paces as if the Germans might materialize from the mist. Elias wiped sweat from his brow, tasting the grit of dust on his lips. If they're not, it's because of infection, not bullets. That's why we're here. He didn't add that the shipment from England had been half what they'd promised. Enough for a dozen men, maybe, if they rationed it tight. The rival supply line, those damn U-boats slipping through the Atlantic, had turned Miracle Drug into a lottery. They crested a low rise, the farmhouse coming into view like a gutted beast. Its roof collapsed under shell fire. Private Lena, the nurse who'd insisted on coming despite orders, waited in the shadow of a crumbling wall. Her face was smudged with dirt, but her hands were steady as she reloaded her sidearm. Witty under fire, she'd cracked jokes during the march to keep morale up, but now her eyes held only sharp focus. Found Kowalski, she said flatly, jerking her thumb toward the interior. Fever's spiking, legs a mess. Shrapnel tore it open yesterday. Elias nodded, pushing past the splintered door. The air inside reeked of gangrene and unwashed fear. Corporal Kowalski lay on a makeshift cot of hay and blankets, his uniform soaked through with sweat, face twisted in delirium. "Doc, the lines, they're breaking," he rasped, eyes unfocused. "Easy, Corp, we're holding." Elias knelt, peeling back the bandage. The wound pulsed red, angry veins spiderwebbing outward. Sepsis, moving fast. He pulled a syringe from his kit, the penicillin vial glinting faintly in the dim light. One dose might buy time, two could save him, but with the patrol scattered and more wounded incoming, choices narrowed to knives. Harlan lingered at the doorway, rifle ready. Heard chatter on the radio. Krauts are pushing from the east. If they cut us off, we're done. Lena shot him a look. Then we move him now. Carry if we have to. Elias hesitated, needle poised. The plan had been simple. Retrieve the patrol, administer the drug en route to the aid station. But the fog had rolled in thicker than expected, scattering them, and now this. He injected half the dose, watching Kowalski's breathing ease fractionally. We can't carry him far. Radio for evac? Lines are jammed, Harlan replied, fiddling with the set clipped to his belt. Static hissed back at him, mocking. A sharp crack echoed outside. Rifle fire close. Lena was at the window in an instant, peering through a jagged hole. Scouts, 2, maybe 3. They're flanking. Elias capped the vial, heart pounding. The external threat they'd feared, not just the wound, but the enemy closing in, turning their fragile outpost into a trap. Resource shortage bit harder now. No time for full treatment, no escape without risk. He grabbed Kowalski's arm, slinging it over his shoulder. Up, we go on foot, stick to the tree line. Kowalski groaned, weight dead and heavy. Harlan took the other side, grunting under the load. Lena covered their rear, her steps light but urgent. They burst from the farmhouse into the mist-shrouded yard, the world narrowing to mud and shadow. The first shot whined past Elias's ear, splintering a fence post. He ducked low, dragging Kowalski behind a rusted tractor. Harlan returned fire, the bark of his Garand splitting the air. They're pinning us! Lena crawled beside Elias, firing blindly into the gray. We can't outrun them like this. Drop him? No. The word came fierce, unyielding. Elias's hands shook as he prepped the second syringe. The rest of the dose. If they made it back, Kowalski might stabilize. If not, at least he'd go without the fire in his veins. He jabbed it in, ignoring the corporal's weak protest. Another volley, closer. Bullets chipped stone, one grazing Harlan's sleeve. He cursed, blood blooming dark. Plan's shot. We hole up or we charge. Elias scanned the yard. The tractor, a shallow ditch, the tree line 50 yards off. The early plan, evac via the road, had backfired spectacularly when the fog hid the ambush. Now adaptation meant gamble. Ditch, draw them in, then bolt. Harlan's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. On 3. They moved as one, Harlan laying suppressive fire while Elias and Lena hauled Kowalski toward the ditch. Mud swallowed their boots, cold and clinging. A German shout cut through, close, too close. Elias glimpsed a helmeted figure emerging from the mist, rifle raised. Lena fired first, her shot true. The man dropped, but his comrades answered, rounds stitching the ground. Elias tumbled into the ditch, Kowalski half on top of him, the impact jarring his kit open. Vials scattered in the muck, one cracked, its precious contents seeping away like hope. Damn it, he breathed, fishing out the survivors. Only 2 left now, for the whole patrol if they regrouped. The cost mounted. Medicine lost, Harlan wounded, time bleeding out. From the ditch, they could see the Germans advancing cautiously, propaganda-fueled confidence in their step. Tales of unbreakable lines, wonder weapons. But Elias knew better. Penicillin wasn't a bomb. It was quiet, insidious, saving lives where ideology failed. If they survived this, maybe they'd capture one. Show him the vials, watch doubt crack that helmeted resolve. Harlan's voice pulled him back. They're reloading. Go! They scrambled up, legs burning, into the tree line. Branches whipped at their faces, the mist their only ally. Behind, the dim light of the field hospital lantern flickered across the canvas walls, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts over the rows of cots. Sergeant Klaus Becker wiped the sweat from his brow, his hand steady despite the fever raging in his veins. The wound in his leg, a jagged tear from shrapnel 2 days back, had festered overnight, turning the skin around it black and swollen. He gritted his teeth as the young medic, Hans, probed the edges with a pair of forceps, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid bite of iodine. "Easy there," Klaus muttered, his voice a low rumble, more command than plea. He'd always been the rock for his squad, the one who patched up the others after skirmishes in the hedgerows of Normandy, cracking dry jokes to keep morale from crumbling. But now, with the Allies pushing hard from the west, supplies were thinner than the rations they'd been doling out. Propaganda posters plastered on the hospital crates promised victory through will alone, but Klaus knew better. Will didn't clot wounds or fight infection. Hans paused, his face pale under the helmet that never came off. "Even here. It's bad, Sarge. The sulfa's not touching it. If we don't get something stronger." He trailed off, glancing toward the corner where the American prisoner, Lieutenant Ellis, sat chained to a post. The Yank had been captured during the same ambush, his uniform torn but his eyes sharp, watching everything with that quiet calculation. Ellis was no ordinary grunt. Whispers said he was some kind of doctor, part of a medical unit experimenting with a new wonder drug. The Germans had interrogated him for days, but he'd given nothing. Until now. From across the room, Nurse Greta emerged from the supply tent, her apron stained with the day's work. She was cautious by nature, her movements precise, always double-checking dosages before administering them. Born in Berlin, she'd volunteered for the front lines out of duty, but the endless stream of boys like Klaus was wearing her down. In her hand, she carried a small vial, its contents glowing faintly amber in the lantern light. A sample of the penicillin Ellis had smuggled in his kit, bartered under the table during a lull in the shelling. "This is all we have left," she said softly, handing it to Hans. "The lieutenant says it's enough for 1 dose, if we're careful." Klaus shifted on the cot, wincing as the movement sent fire up his leg. An American miracle for a German soldier. The Führer's posters would call it treason. His tone carried a wry edge, but there was no real bite. Survival trumped ideology when gangrene whispered in your ear. Ellis leaned forward against his chains, the metal clinking softly. "Call it what you want, Sergeant. Back home, we tested it on everything from pneumonia to battlefield rot. It's not magic, it's science, but it works." He spoke with the easy confidence of a man who'd seen it save lives in the labs before the invasion, his wit surfacing even in captivity. No lectures, just facts, delivered like a poker hand he knew he'd win. Hans hesitated, the syringe in his hand trembling slightly. The external threat loomed larger than the infection. The rumble of artillery in the distance grew closer, Allied tanks probing the lines. If Klaus didn't pull through, his squad would fracture. They'd already lost their lieutenant to a sniper, and morale was a fragile thing. But using the drug meant defying orders. The High Command had dismissed it as enemy trickery, propaganda to demoralize the troops. "What if it's poison?" Hans whispered, more to himself than anyone. Greta placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch firm. "Then we die anyway. Inject it." Her voice was steady, the caution in her eyes giving way to resolve. She'd seen too many men fade from untreated wounds, their last breaths rattling with unspoken regrets. As Hans plunged the needle into Klaus's thigh, the sergeant let out a sharp hiss, his fist clenching the cot's edge. The liquid burned cold, spreading like frost through the heat of his fever. For a moment, silence fell, broken only by the distant crump of shells. Ellis watched, his expression unreadable, while Greta busied herself with fresh bandages, her mind already racing to the next patient. Hours blurred into a haze for Klaus. The pain ebbed slowly, not vanishing but retreating, like an enemy pulling back under fire. By dawn, the swelling had eased, color returning to his skin. He sat up gingerly, testing the leg, and managed a nod to Hans. "Feels like I might walk out of here after all." But the victory was short-lived. Outside, the ground trembled as a reconnaissance plane buzzed low, spotting the hospital's position. Alarms wailed, and orders came crackling over the radio. Evacuate south, the Allies were breaking through. Klaus hauled himself to his feet, leaning on Hans, while Greta gathered what supplies she could. Vials clinking in her pack, the precious penicillin guarded like contraband. Elias was unchained for the march, his wrists raw but his steps sure. "You're going to need more of that stuff," he said to Greta as they joined the ragged column of soldiers stumbling through the mud. "The front's collapsing. Your propaganda can't hold back what's coming." She shot him a glance, her caution flaring. "And your army? It brings death on tracks. This drug saves lives, yours or ours, it doesn't care." Klaus limped alongside, overhearing. "Maybe that's the point. We've been fighting shadows, lies about wonder weapons, unbreakable lines. This—" he tapped his leg. "This is real." The column snaked through the bocage, hedgerows clawing at their uniforms. A sudden burst of machine gun fire erupted from the tree line, pinning them down. Bullets whined past, kicking up dirt. Hans dove behind a low wall, pulling Klaus with him, while Greta crouched low, shielding the pack. Elias, unarmed but quick, spotted a gap in the enemy line. A lone Allied patrol, perhaps scouts ahead of the main push. "Over there!" Elias shouted, pointing. "Flank them! Use the ditch!" Klaus barked orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. The squad moved as one, Hans covering with his rifle while Klaus directed the advance. Greta followed, heart pounding, the weight of the vials a reminder of what they carried. Not just medicine, but a crack in the wall of denial. They overran the patrol in a flurry of shouts and shots, the scouts scattering into the woods. But not without cost. The sun hung low over the Rhine, casting long shadows across the makeshift hospital tent that had become their world these past weeks. Elias wiped the sweat from his brow, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and carbolic soap. His hands, steady now after days of endless suturing and injecting, paused over the last vial of penicillin. It was nearly empty, a pale yellow promise in the dim light filtering through the canvas walls. Sergeant Harlan grunted from his cot, shifting his bandaged leg with a wince. "That the end of it, Doc? Feels like I've been poked more times than a V2 target." His voice carried that rough edge, laced with the pain he wouldn't admit. But his eyes, sharp, unyielding, fixed on Elias with the trust of a man who'd seen too many friends buried without a fight. Elias nodded, drawing the syringe carefully. "Last dose for you, yeah. Hold still." He pressed the needle into Harlan's arm, watching the liquid disappear. Across the tent, Private Kowalski sat hunched over a field radio, his fingers tapping out a final Morse code burst to command. The kid's face was gaunt, the fever from his infected wound finally breaking 2 days ago. But the shadows under his eyes spoke of nights spent whispering prayers in Polish under his breath. From the corner, where the German prisoners were segregated by a simple rope line, came a low murmur. Obergefreiter Miller, the one they dubbed the skeptic for his endless questions, leaned forward. His uniform hung loose on a frame wasted by dysentery, but his gaze was clear now, the delirium gone. "You Americans," he said in halting English, "your magic powder. It pulls men from the grave. Our doctors, they said it was lies, Allied tricks to break our will." He touched the bandage on his side, where the shrapnel had nearly ended him. "But I live. Why share it with us? We are the enemy." Harlan chuckled, a dry rasp. "Enemy today, patient tomorrow. Doc here's got a soft spot for anyone breathing, Fritz. Besides, who's gonna rebuild your damn fatherland if we let you all rot?" Elias capped the syringe, his mind drifting to the crates they'd scavenged from the bombed-out supply depot 3 days back. Half ruined, but enough to save a dozen more lives, German and Allied alike. The early plan, that desperate rush to the riverbank under mortar fire, had backfired spectacularly. Kowalski clipped by stray bullets, Harlan's legs shattered on the uneven ground. They'd lost the first crate to the current, watched it sink like a stone. But Muller, half-conscious and dragged along as a guide, had pointed out the hidden ford, his knowledge of the terrain turning defeat into salvage. Now, as the Allies pushed across the river in earnest, the tent buzzed with the distant rumble of tanks and the sharp crack of small arms. Elias straightened, surveying the rows of cots. Not everyone had made it. Corporal Reese, the wiry scout with a quick laugh, lay still under a sheet, his body too far gone even for the penicillin. The cost lingered in the quiet spaces between breaths, a reminder that medicine was no match for the machine of war. Kowalski switched off the radio, his shoulders slumping in relief. Command sending relief at dawn. Medevac choppers, fresh supplies. We're pulling out. He glanced at Miller, then back to Elias. What about him? The Krauts'll want their own for questioning. Miller met Elias's eyes, a flicker of something, gratitude, defiance, passing between them. I go back, the German said simply. But if your powder spreads, perhaps the fighting ends sooner. Propaganda promised victory through will. This is stronger. Harlan swung his good leg over the cot's edge, testing his weight. Hell, if a needle can do more than 1,000 speeches, maybe there's hope for us fools yet. He gripped Elias's shoulder, the gesture rough but firm. You did good, Doc. Kept us kicking when the odds said otherwise. Elias felt the weight of it all settle. Not triumph, but a weary resolve. Outside, the Rhine flowed on, muddy and indifferent, carrying the remnants of battles upstream and down. As the first stars pricked the evening sky, he stepped into the cooling air, the tent's lanterns casting a warm glow on the faces within. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot, but in that fragile pocket of healing, something had shifted. A bridge built not of steel, but of serum and stubborn humanity, spanning the chasm between sides. And in its wake, the lingering ache of what they'd lost ensured no one walked away unchanged.